Welcome, everyone. My name is Alison Sullivan, and I am the founder of Protect Us. And I just want to say thank you for spending an hour with me tonight. I know we're all really busy, especially this time of year with the school year ending. And so I appreciate your time tonight. A couple of housekeeping matters before we get started. John, my colleague, is helping me run this webinar. So if you have questions at the end that you want to keep confidential, you can send those questions directly to John in the chat. If they're for everyone to read, you can just put them in the general chat. We are recording this webinar for the portion of my content, but when it comes time for Q&A and sharing personal things at that time, that portion will not be recorded or made public, just so you're clear on that. And just by way of disclaimer, I want to say that I'm going to be talking about real cases that I investigated, but the details of those cases will be changed so that the victims and perpetrators of those cases are not identifiable. And I'm going to speak tonight broadly about how to better prepare the young men in our lives on the subject of consent. But I do want to say that I will be using generalizations. So not everything that I say tonight is going to apply to every individual situation. Everyone is unique and every situation is unique. So keep that in mind. A little bit about me. I went to University of Rhode Island for my undergraduate degree, and I worked for a nonprofit for 7 years, and actually bringing teams of college students into Central America for service projects. So I served in Belize, Mexico, and Guatemala, and that was prior to going into law enforcement. I became a police officer in 2002, and I graduated from the Post Academy class in Meriden, Connecticut. The number one in my class academically, but not the shooting or driving portions. Those were not I didn't get a perfect score in those. I actually had to retake the driving portion twice for backing because they make you back through this ridiculous cone pattern that zigzag like 500 yards, and that wasn't fantastic. I served the Wethersfield Police Department for 20 years, and I retired at the rank of detective. I was actually the first female to be made detective full-time. So although Wethersfield was founded in 1634, they did not make a full-time appointed detective until actually 2017. I've been retired for a few years now, and what I do is use my expertise and case studies to better educate and prepare people on how not to become crime victims, but also more specifically, I'm really passionate about the prevention of sexual harm, and it's what I have the most experience with. So among some of my assignments at the police department, I monitored registered sex offenders in my jurisdiction. I investigated sexual assault cases, and I also investigated false accusation cases. And I learned a lot about how these cases develop and how some people get themselves into some really unfortunate situations. So what I share with you tonight will be made available in a document at the end for folks who want to put their email in the chat and would like that document. So if you'd like to just listen in and sit back, feel free to do that. John's also going to be putting this information in the chat. But if you want to take notes and that's how you learn, feel free to do that. So why do we want to talk about consent and the subject of consent? The first thing I want to say is that we want to teach our sons and the young men in our lives to be amazing, to act honorably, to act in a way that they're proud of, to treat other people well, even when it comes to sexual interactions with other people. And I'm going to speak very generally about boys and young men as initiators, and females, generally speaking, as the other party involved, but that is not always the case. So the examples that I use, I just want to be clear, relate to whether your son is non-binary or is attracted to other men or whatever her sexual orientation is. So consent is something that's not really taught well for our young people. And although it's a state requirement in Connecticut public schools, the challenges that are put upon teachers, the restrictions on how much time they have to teach everything that's a requirement and how that breaks down, it's a minuscule amount of time given in a classroom setting to talk about something that's hugely important. So where do our young kids get information on this critically important subject? Well, unfortunately, they get a lot of their information about consent from war stories from their buddies on how far they've gotten sexually or what they've done sexually, porn, and or TikTok. And while TikTok may be a great source of information for funny dog videos, and I love it for good recipe ideas, it's not a great source of information on a subject as serious as consent and as impactful as consent. But that is where a lot of young men are getting their information on the subject from. And that's why I just want to say to start, it's amazing that we are here together tonight. The fact that you are here to invest your time and your energy in learning more about how to talk effectively about this subject with the young men in your lives is amazing. So we teach consent because of its importance. We have goals for the young men in our lives and how they operate. And we also want the people that they are attracted to be treated well, to be treated with honor, to be treated with respect. I'm going to start illustrating this point by telling you about a case that I investigated. And the people involved in that case, we'll call them Seth and Mia. Now, Seth and Mia were neighbors. They lived in apartments above each other, first and second floor apartments. And they did not know each other well, but they did end up exchanging cell phones at one point because they were both big fans of Amazon. So each of them were routinely getting packages delivered, and they would sometimes take turns bringing those packages in for the other. So that's why they initially exchanged cell phone numbers. Well, there was one night when Mia got into a horrendous fight with her mom on the phone. It was really upsetting, very emotional, and just a terrible conversation. She gets off the phone with her mom, and coincidentally, she got a package delivered she wasn't aware of because she was yelling on the phone with her mom. And Seth decides to text her and say, "Hey, there's a package if you want to bring it up." And she texts back, "Sure." So he proceeds to go upstairs and just goes to hand the package to her. She opens the door, and he can immediately tell that she's really incredibly upset. And he said, "Here's your package. Are you okay?" And she said, "Actually, I'm not okay at all. Do you want to come in and have a beer with me?" And he said, "Sure." So he went inside the apartment and they had a beer together. And then she lit a joint and offered it to him as well. They shared the joint, and the talking was comfortable and easy, and they enjoyed talking to each other. And things progressed because Seth perceived this invite as, she's interested, she wants to get together with me. Mia saw the invitation as, I had a horrible fight with my mom, and I'd love to have someone to talk to about this. So they're on a couch in her apartment, and he leans in more closely and starts to kiss her. She doesn't, dramatically resist. She doesn't yell no. She kind of just gets a little bit stiff. And well, Seth doesn't pick up this cue because now he's kind of buzzed and a little bit high. He's not an avid marijuana user, and so he's somewhat under the influence, and he proceeds to kiss Mia, and then he actually believes that she wants to go further. He makes that conclusion and lifts up her skirt on the couch and proceeds to have sexual intercourse with her. What Seth didn't realize in those moments was that Mia was having a traumatic experience. What Seth didn't know is that they were actually on the couch that Mia's uncle had molested her on as a young teen. He had no idea. And so when Seth began going further physically with her, Mia said that she just froze. She absolutely froze. She said it was horrible. She felt like she couldn't scream, say no, or anything other than to freeze up. Now, Seth had no idea. And the investigation that ensued, although Seth was not ultimately charged with sexual assault, Mia made a sexual assault complaint and a thorough investigation ensued. That investigation impacted Seth's job. It impacted his having his lease renewed at this apartment, and it had a devastating impact on Mia's life. The thing that's really significant about that investigation that I want to bring to your attention is that there are two common denominators at play in that situation that we see repeatedly as police investigators. And well north of 90% of my cases involve these two denominators, and they are unknown person and alcohol and or drugs involved. So when you have those two denominators at play, you need to understand, and the young men in your lives need to understand that that means high risk. You are at high risk for significant misunderstandings that can rise to the level of a criminal investigation, and they become very serious very quickly. And when I did interview Seth, I felt for him because he had no idea what Mia's history was. He had no idea that she was going through that experience on the couch that night. So that's something to keep in mind. What do we want to say about consent? I'm going to break this down for you in 4 steps on what we want to say about consent to our sons, nephews, or young men in our lives. We're really well familiar at this point with, if you hear no, that means no. No means no. If you hear no, stop. And that is true, and it is significant, but that's not nearly enough of a conversation. It's not nearly enough learning for the gravity of the situation at hand when you're talking about potential sexual interactions and the potential for sexual harm, sexual assault to occur. What I mean by that is we've, to be helpful, to pare down the message to young men, no means no, or to women if they are the initiators, to make it in a condensed form, but it oversimplifies it in a way that might not be helpful. So here's what I would say for my first point, which is what we want to say about consent to our sons or to the young men in our lives. The goal is affirmative, informed consent, okay, with active responses to questions. So affirmative, informed consent with active responses to questions. And when I say questions, we're going to put in the chat, John's going to put in the chat for me what I mean for examples. Can you just let that Alyssa into the waiting room for me, John? So here are some examples. Thank you. Here are some examples of questions that I am suggesting that your son can potentially use or choose from in a situation like the situation where Seth was in with Mia. Do you like what I'm doing? Wait for an answer. Do you want me to keep going? Or maybe not? Wait for an answer, an audible answer. Do you want to take a short break? Or, hey, let's check in. How is this actually going? Do you feel okay about this? Now, I know those might sound hokey or corny or whatever adjectives my 15-year-old son and yours will use to describe those, but I'll tell you what, Seth would give a lot of money to have known those questions ahead of time and to have thought to ask even one of them. Because if he had asked even one of those questions on that couch with Mia, I can tell you that the outcome would have been different. I would, so we have the 3 questions that you can ask, and you can think of other examples. Or ask your son, hey, these are some ideas of questions you could ask. What do you think? What are questions that you think you could ask in the moment when you think that you want to go approach someone physically or go further physically that you could ask that are in require affirmative responses? What I will add is that you need to be mindful of the fact that communication is a dynamic process. So it's influenced by context, tone, history, and you know this intuitively, right? So you know that if you've been in a relationship, let's say you're married, you've been married for 20 or 30 years, or let's say your closest friend or your boyfriend, you've been together for 2 or 3 years. You could know someone for a significant amount of time, and there's still room for misunderstanding, depending on the mood and the context, whether it's said quickly over the phone or via text, right? The communication in these moments between your son or mine and another person that they're interested in, specifically if they're interested in them sexually, right? The communication in those moments is so important. But if that other person, they don't know them at all, or there's booze involved, or weed, or any other substance like that, they are really stacking the deck against themselves in terms of their ability to clearly and effectively communicate. And I can't emphasize that enough, how critical that is. Okay. Secondly, I want to say that we want to clarify for our sons, nephews, any other young men in our lives that will listen to us on this subject matter. You want to clarify what affirmative informed consent is not, and spell that out for them. And this may be awkward, it may be uncomfortable. A lot of these conversations are going to be, but they're hugely important. So what I mean by what informed consent is not, you want to really spell out the fact that pushing ahead physically to get as far as you want to go, and because the other person is not actively resisting you or actively shouting no, that is not a green light. That does not mean it's all good. And that is a really dangerous way to proceed sexually. Take it from someone who has investigated dozens and dozens of these cases. It's a risk for your son and what kind of trouble he may get into on a personal level, at school, on campus, or with the police. And it's also a risk to the other person that we want to demonstrate care for. It's a risk that they could come away from the interaction having maybe not the perception that they have been sexually assaulted, but there is a risk that they're going to come away from the interaction just feeling really horribly about what happened, really feeling crappy about that. And we want both parties to come away from the interaction feeling good about what happened. But young people need direction on this, and that's why we're talking about it tonight. I'm going to say that it does take forethought and effort and initiative on our parts as parents, as guardians, as caregivers, mentors. It really is going to take effort. And it's going to be a lot more involved than just, if you hear no, it means no. It's going to be an involved conversation, multiple conversations. What else do we want to talk about with our sons? I think it's really important to communicate in this culture at this time when young men are getting a lot of different messages that it's okay to want things sexually. That's okay. And we're not talking about it because they're already in trouble in some way. I really would reassure, and I've said this to my son, as squeamish as that makes him, it's okay to want things sexually. And it's okay to ask for them with someone that you're interested in. Okay. That's okay. What's not okay is guilt tripping someone into doing what you want them to do physically. What's not okay is the pressuring and the asking over and over and over again, as many high school boys do. What's not okay is verbal sexual coercion, or what I call sexual bullying. And that is when you use your verbal persuasion, harassing, guilt tripping, asking and re-asking, or insulting them, or saying, it's just going to be really quick, or I'm going to have blue balls if you don't take care of me, or what are you afraid? What are you embarrassed? What do you not know what you're doing? There's all kinds of manipulative, cajoling, and sexual bullying that goes on in high schools every week. And many, many, many of those cases do not rise to the level of being able to make a criminal case, but that doesn't mean that they are not ethically awful and cause trauma for the other people involved. I've heard of dozens of these cases. It's very, very common. And it's not something that I often hear from other parents or people in positions of leadership in hospitals, in schools, that this is an important issue to address among our young men in particular, not exclusively, but in particular, that sexual bullying, describe what it is, spell it out for them, and that it is not okay. And again, I would remind them that you want to act in a way that's honorable. You want to behave in a way, whether you're with me or in the backseat of a car with someone you're interested in, you want to behave in a way that you feel good about, not that you feel ashamed about. The fourth thing that I think is really important is to set expectations for our young men, because these are things that they might actually be really just unaware of due to lack of experience or good information out there. So what do I mean by setting expectations? I mean very clearly explaining to the young men in our lives that you may be interested in someone and they may be indicating to you an interest back because you've been snapping for a couple of days, weeks, months, because they've obviously flirted with you and your friends have seen it, whatever the case may be. They may be interested, but that does not mean that they are ready to become physical with you. And specifically, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily ready to go all the way and have sex with you. And that is for all kinds of reasons that you will help explain. So what I mean is just spelling out in a really clear way for young men. Here's the deal. You can plan on being interested in someone, whether it's a girl or a guy or non-binary. You can plan on being interested in someone. They express interest in you, but when you get together and you're hanging out alone and you want to go further sexually with them, that they're going to shut that down. Plan on that happening. And it's completely normal and it's completely healthy. And set that expectation for them. That is going to happen. It's completely normal. It's completely healthy. And how are you going to respond? Because you're probably going to feel frustrated, pissed off, potentially feeling rejected, down about yourself, or mad. You may feel mad. And how will you handle that in that moment? What will you do? Because that's a really important conversation that I don't believe happens for most young men. Encourage them to think ahead about how they're going to deal with that, and explain to them there are many, many reasons why someone who, even if they like you and they're into you, might shut things down physically. And here's just some of them. And spell it out for your son. She just may not be ready for it yet. She maybe wants to wait until there's more of an established relationship, or knows you a little bit. You just met tonight, or you just met last week. She may have her period and therefore has no interest in going any further and exposing you to that. And she's embarrassed to even say that. Young men might not even be aware or be thinking of that in the moment. What you want to initiate or do, and what she may even want to do, might go against her faith, her personal faith, or her personal values, or what she knows her family wants her to do. And so she's got all kinds of mixed emotions going on. And so she pauses things or stops things from progressing. And again, that's completely normal. Lastly, and I would say incredibly important, is she might be really worried about getting pregnant. And because you just met or you're just getting to know each other, you've had zero conversation about using protection or anything like that, which is again why it's so important to understand these interactions between people. And we know this as adults too. This doesn't just apply to teenagers. When you don't know someone and you add a beer or two, a cocktail, and other drugs, the ability to have effective or healthy interactions and effective conversations on this subject matter, what I'm putting my finger on right here, is so difficult. I'm going to tell you about a case between a young woman and man named Lily. We'll call them Lily and Justin. So this was a house party arranged by Lily's friends, and they're all on a all-girl sports team together. College freshmen, home for the weekend, and they arrange a girls' night. So not a girls' night out, it's a girls' night in. And they're in sweatpants. This isn't a night out. They're not, there's no makeup. They're going to hang out together. They've got munchies. They've got a lot of booze, and they're going to have fun with each other. Now, it's supposed to be an all-girls night, but one of the girls couldn't get a ride. So she asked for a ride from her cousin, and he provides the ride. She invites him in to say hi, and he ends up staying at the sleepover. Now, this night, and it was the plan, everyone's drinking and having fun to start. And they're drinking a lot of alcohol. To the point where my victim, Lily, is so intoxicated that she is having difficulty toward the end of the night standing up on her feet. So they're partying in the basement together, and she gets to the point where she is so intoxicated that she can't get up now. And her friends think they do her a favor by bringing her some blankets and pillows to the basement where she can sleep it off. And Justin decides to join her in the basement and stay down there. And her friends actually leave her down there. Now, Justin doesn't look like a scary guy. I had multiple interviews with him. And it was one of the friends' cousins. So they didn't think anything of it. And the thing that I will tell you is that Justin did not wake up this Friday morning and say to himself, how can I absolutely just destroy someone's life tonight? How can I do that? Not at all. But that is in fact what happened. By the next afternoon, Justin is poolside with his buddies, figuring out what they're going to do that night. And Lily is at Hartford Hospital having a rape kit examination, which is a horrific experience that I've accompanied victims for. And he has no idea. Now, he should have known, because at the end of things, Justin initiated intercourse with Lily when she was unconscious or semi-conscious, we'll say. At the end, she was definitely unconscious, and he admitted to that in a later interview. When Lily woke up on the basement floor of that house the next day, she immediately knew something was wrong. Her underwear and bra were on inside out and backwards, and her clothes were not right, and someone had clearly dressed her. And the only person there is Justin, who abruptly left the house. When Justin's cousin and some of the friends at the party said, what did you do? Did something happen with you and Lily? Did you have sex with her? It was, oh, no, absolutely not, no. Again, I emphasize the risk, and I would implore you to repeat this as a risk when you have conversations with the teens in your life, that this applies to heavy drinking, any drinking, and or drugs. You better really be careful. And you need to understand that that is a high risk situation. It is as risky, and I would encourage you to use this analogy. Think of that like getting on a motorcycle on the Berlin Turnpike in Wethersfield, Connecticut, except that you're going to ride that motorcycle without a helmet in the dark with your eyes closed at a high rate of speed. Now, you might make it. You might be okay. Or it might end disastrously for you and the other people involved that you crash into. That is really how risky it is. Justin is now a registered sex offender. And for Lily, it was a devastating and life-changing event. So she ended up dropping out of college. She had been a Phi Beta Kappa member, high honors, crashed out into a clinical depression that took years for her to overcome in her life. So truly a devastating experience. Let me give you some action items to take. Actually, I'm going to give you one big action item, and I'm going to give you a few suggestions on how to execute that. My challenge to you is to plan on having impactful, significant conversations with your teen son about the subject of consent. And I want you to think about this like a project that is important and meaningful, and you're going to undertake it with some planning is going to be involved. So if you think about other projects that you engage in, you're going to organize a dinner event for friends, or you're going to tackle a home project at your house. You get a plan in mind. You think about the supplies, what you will need before you execute the plan. And when you prepare that way, it goes well. I do think that you should think about these conversations in that way. I'm going to encourage you and challenge you to consider keeping a goal in mind of making this a minimum of a 5-hour goal. Not in one shot. No teenager's going to listen to us for 5 hours. I mean, in the next year, or maybe the next 2 or 3 years, depending on the age and maturity of your son or your nephew or other teen under your care. 5 hours. Not a one-off sentence about no means no or a brief conversation, but several hours of dialogue, exchange, question asking, because it is that important. And if you think about it, here's the analogy that I use. We understand how important driving is and how dangerous it can be, right? So we understand as a country that someone behind the wheel of a motor vehicle can do real harm, life-changing harm to themselves or other people if they don't know how to drive. And so states require, let's say, something like 40 or 60 hours of mandated driver training before we allow them even to get behind the wheel. But what about this subject of sexual harm and consent, right? How much time do we commit to preparing our young people for something as important as this? And the risk of harm is much greater than a bad motor vehicle accident. Sexual harm, as many of you know personally, does catastrophic damage. It impacts the victim their whole life, how they think, how they operate, whether they become a substance abuse, whether they turn to substance abuse disorders to cope, whether they become suicidal. It impacts their goal setting. If they drop out of school, quit jobs, it impacts them professionally, educationally. It then impacts how they partner up and who they choose to partner up with. It impacts how victims, it impacts how they parent. So it does generational harm. And so it's why I want to pause and say, it's amazing that you're here tonight. The fact that you decided to join in tonight and invest an hour of your time in figuring out how to be better prepared for these conversations is incredible. So here are my quick suggestions on how to do that so we can get to some of your questions. Consider what motivates your kid. What motivates them to act? What impacts them? Is it how they're going to be perceived by friends? Is it how other people are going to view them? Because I can tell you very clearly, Justin's very popular friend group thought of him quite differently after he became a registered sex offender. His whole world changed. His whole social standing changed in a very dramatic and direct way. Maybe your son is motivated by that. Maybe they're motivated by wanting to make their family proud of them or how his family thinks of him. Maybe he's motivated by fear or shame. I don't know. You know your own kid or whomever you're here tonight for and you're thinking about. You know what motivates them. Some kids, my son, it really values learning and being in the know and being intellectual and highly educated. He really is motivated by that. And so that's how I pitch it. I will say things like, do you want to know, even more than anyone, probably in your peer group, how best to operate in this situation? Because I can tell you. Second thing to keep in mind is who will he most likely listen to? And you may be here tonight, but you're not necessarily the person he's most likely going to listen to. So that is important to think about. If it's not you, can you share this content with the person that is? Maybe it's a favorite uncle. Maybe it's their dad. Or maybe it's an older sibling, someone they look up to. I would encourage you to think about, am I really the best person to deliver this information? And if I'm not, who is that I can partner with and share this information with in order to have an impactful conversation with my teenage son? You could consider setting up a learning challenge. So this is something that I do personally, and I frame it like this. I have some information that I think I know more about than you based on my training and experience or just being a lot older than you. And you know stuff that I don't know. So here's my challenge. How about this week, I set up a 10-minute learning time at the table, whether it's over dinner or just talking. And I present to you for 10 minutes, like a lesson or however you want to frame it, whatever language you choose to use, to teach you about something that I think you probably don't have a lot of good information on. And I would like you to teach me something. I would like you to teach me what I don't know about AI, or what I don't know about TikTok, or what I don't know about what's actually important to kids at your high school. Clue me in on something that I am clueless about and make it a mutual learning experience. Furthermore, I would suggest that you could follow up with them from that learning challenge, or really any of these conversations. You could consider following up with them via text. It's their language. It's how most of our teens communicate now. And unless you have a particularly astute academic teen and you want to have a follow-up email conversation, but my kids are texters. So my kids are 17 and 15, and they're more comfortable sharing uncomfortable information with me via text than they are face-to-face. It might be the interrogation lamp I have over my dining room table. Just kidding. It actually does resemble one, but I don't have an interrogation lamp. But texting is their language, so feel free to use that. My last idea for an impactful, effective conversation would be to share, you could share a news article with them. There are sadly reports in the news about sexual assault cases or false accusation cases routinely. So you could say, hey, listen, I saw in the news this case with this coach or this college student, whoever it is, what do you think of this? And ask them their opinion. You can reference me. You can say, hey, I was at this event where I heard this detective tell some really scary stories about some cases she investigated, and share the story of Seth and Mia in the apartment, or Lily and Justin at that house party, and use that as a jumping point to say, what do you think of that? What do you think you would have done in those situations? And take it from there. In closing, I would like to say, I appreciate your time, and I hope that this was helpful. Tried to give you some practical steps